Hey everyone, it's Sevy. Chongyun is currently on Childe's banner and I thought he deserved some love and attention. For the first month since the start of Genshin Impact, Chongyun was seen as a very middle character. He didn't particularly excel at being a main carry and players weren't sure how to use him as a support. And then he got slotted into the national team and much of his strengths were discovered. So in this video, I'm going to go over some gameplay tips for Chongyun players to get the most synergy and damage out of him and include some basic build info to those who are new to his kit. Let's dive in. So like I said earlier, Chongyun doesn't particularly shine as a main carry. I'll be honest, when I was in my early AR days, I put him on the field a lot in a Shatter comp with Xingqiu, and that did get me through most of the content then. But once you reach higher content and summon more main carries, whether 4-star or 5-star, you might discover that Chongyun falls off the mark quite a bit. So why is this exactly? Well, Chongyun's normal attacks have animations that feel slow and make him prone to interruption, especially the last hit in his sequence. More than that, their attack multipliers aren't as high either. In fact, he has the lowest multipliers versus other Claymore users. So in terms of normal attacks, unless maybe assisted by a Skyward Pride, these automatically make him a less than ideal choice as a main carry in late game. Unlocking his C1 helps in this regard, but only by a little bit. I'll get to that in my Constellations discussion later. Essentially, he is not the ideal main carry, and that being said, if you do use him as a main carry and are very successful with it, hats off to you. Chongyun mains are wonderful. But for those who already have their main carries and wonder how to slot Chongyun in, how can you do it? Well, luckily, Chongyun is great at two things: support and burst quick swap. Let's start with Chongyun's support capabilities, which lie mainly in his elemental skill. His skill summons an ice field that provides a few effects for your on-field character. Its main effect is to infuse attacks with cryo. Chongyun's entire kit shows that he's not a physical DPS. Since his skill infuses cryo, you'll want him to deliver as much cryo damage as possible. In another case, Chongyun can also help other characters unify their attacks into cryo. For example, if you have a Cryo Kaya build, then at least his normals turn into cryo too. Chongyun's infusion also helps a lot with destroying shields, but if your melee DPS units don't benefit from a cryo infusion of normal attacks like Eula, then Chongyun's skill would be a very bad idea. What else can his skill do? His first passive talent allows your melee characters to get an 8% boost in the normal attack speed. When this expires, it summons an Ice Blade that will damage enemies and reduce their cryo resistance by 10% for 8 seconds. If you pair Chongyun with someone like Kaya, that's also a great buff to help Kaya's burst deal more damage. At C0, that's all it does. Its biggest benefit is actually unlocked at C2, which we'll get to later. And lastly, it's good for battery purposes since it generates 4 cryo particles when you cast and hit an enemy. Now for his burst. It actually does a decent amount of damage for a low cost of 40. It's not necessarily broken, but it's good, useful in quick swap, and even better given the right setup. So Chongyun's burst swords are great for 3 things: shredding enemy shields, dealing damage with reverse melt, and setting up melt reactions for your pyro DPS. Here, we can shred an Abyss Mage's shields fast with Chongyun's burst. Here, we'll perform a reverse melt. To do reverse melts, apply pyro on enemies first by using someone like Bennett, or even an animal unit to swirl applied pyro on enemies. But if you didn't already know this, Chongyun's burst can actually do triple melts, and this is how I like to get the most damage out of him. The best unit to pair with Chongyun for a triple melt combo on his burst is Bennett. This has something to do with elemental gauge theory, but let's not go too deep into that right now. Basically, you just need to know that Chongyun's burst doesn't get rid of the pyro aura timer on the affected enemy right away, which means that it can take 3 Ice Sword reverse melts before the pyro aura is removed, as long as you use it right after Bennett's burst or skill applies pyro. Let's slow down this clip so you can better see.
Everybody stand! Very
Now that we've gone over some great ways to use Chongyun, what else does his kit have to offer, particularly his constellations? Here's a brief rundown. C1. This constellation helps those who use Chongyun's normal attacks, but it doesn't really add anything to his best roles as a support and burst DPS. Unlocking his C1 allows him to release these ice blades on his final attack animation. They deal cryo damage based on 50% of Chongyun's attack. In intense scenarios, you're likely dodge cancelling his attacks anyway, so you probably won't reach that final hit very often, and the damage payoff isn't that great either. C2 is arguably his best support constellation. It reduces the cooldown by 15% of skills and bursts cast within that field. The value of this is more apparent for talents with long cooldowns. For example, Xingqiu's skill now has an 18-second cooldown instead of 21. Chongyun's field can then benefit your team rotations to allow for less time in between skills and bursts. C3 is a great constellation to get the most damage out of Chongyun's burst. C4 is a bit meh, 1 energy per 2 seconds, and on the condition that they have to be affected by cryo when Chongyun deals damage to them doesn't sound impressive. His burst is already quite low cost and the skill already generates a lot of elemental particles, so you don't need it. This effect also isn't affected by his energy recharge stat. C5 is also a bit meh. It increases elemental skills one-time damage, which isn't that high to begin with, and that's about it. C6 just makes him the best version of his burst DPS role. He summons one more Ice Blade, and as long as you have more HP than the enemy, a 15% damage bonus is applied. For example, in this clip, you can see that the first 2 Ice Blades deal 45k, while the last one, which deals 48k, is because the Geo Bishop HP is now lower than Chongyun's, a respectable damage bump all in all. So to sum it up, his kit is geared towards support utility and burst quick swap. Is it a good kit? I wouldn't say it's the most competitive kit, but it has certainly found its place in one of the most meta teams to date. So now we know what he can do from C0 to C6. Now, how to build him? Although there are already Chongyun build guides floating around, there have been recent weapon and artifact releases that now benefit him. So here are some updated best in slots that you can use for your Chongyun. For artifact sets and stat builds, 2-piece Blizzard Strayer 2-piece Noblesse are the easiest to build. To increase his support function, you can use him on 4-piece Noblesse too. But for max burst damage, and this is what I use, you can put Chongyun on 4-piece Emblem set. For lower ARs, if you can't farm the mentioned artifacts yet, you can probably temporarily put Berserker, Exile, Braveheart, either full sets or 2-piece combos. For the main stats, use a crit rate or damage circlet depending on your weapon and artifact substats. The goal is to aim for at least a 50 to 100 crit ratio. For his goblet, cryo damage goblet is the only choice. And for his sands, I think attack percent is better than ER percent, since Chongyun's burst only costs 40 anyway, so you don't need that much energy recharge. You might even be using him with an energy recharge weapon. Even with an emblem set, I'd still recommend an attack percent sands, but you should still get ER substats from his artifacts if you don't use an ER weapon. Having around 120 to 140% ER is good enough and will let you spam his burst. So for his best weapons, most DPS claymores can generally work for Chongyun. I'll give options for all rarities, and I'll also go through what you should avoid. The best options for 3-star weapons would be Debate Club or Blood-Tainted Greatsword, which would have to be used in a melt comp. For 4 stars, the best free-to-play options are either the Luxurious Sea Lord if you have one, or the Black Cliff Slasher if you're willing to save up for it in the Star Glitter shop. A prototype Archaic would work too, although it'll be weaker than the Black Cliff or the Tuna Sword. As for the Inazuma craftable claymore, I think a lot of damage potential is wasted since the energy refunding passive is wasted on his 40 energy cost to burst. It might be passable for an emblem build Chongyun, but prototype Archaic is probably generally better for damage. As for gacha weapons, your top choices are the Sacrificial Greatsword, great for 100% potential uptime on his skill if it's on high refinement. Then there's the brand new Akumaru, which is a bang for your buck burst damage claymore. Lastly, there's the Lithic Blade, but only if you use him with at least 3 Leo members in the team, like his national team. For pay-to-plays, the Serpent Spine on the Battle Pass is an excellent choice, and it makes his crit stats easier to build. Also, you can't go wrong with any 5-star claymore currently out, except for the Song of Broken Pines. Essentially, avoid weapons that give HP, defense, and physical damage substats. The Snow Tomb Star Silver is the most criminally misleading weapon because while it looks perfect on him, it gives a physical damage bonus stat that is useless on Chongyun. For team comps, there's the quintessential national team, which already has lots of videos on it if you want to know more. If you play this team with a non-C6 Bennett, Xiangling would be the main cryo-infused carry while the bursts are up. There's a mono cryo Kaya plus Chongyun plus Animo Flex, which is a pretty decent comp with Kaya as the main carry since his normal attacks have pretty high multipliers for a 4-star. You can of course use Ayaka instead of the Favonius Captain. You can also use Freeze Shatter comps paired with Xingqiu, Barbara, or Kokomi. Not that ideal if you're aiming for meta teams because while Freeze Shatter combos are fun to play with, their damage output pales in comparison to other reactions. But generally, he fits into team comps that deal cryo damage or use melt reactions. Now what about don'ts? Do not put Chongyun in a team comp you don't want cryo-infused attacks in. For example, if your main DPS is Razor or Eula, don't pair them with Chongyun because once Chongyun infuses their attacks with cryo, they lose out on their physical attacks. So that's pretty much it for this Chongyun guide. It's pretty comprehensive, but whether you're a new player or a veteran Chongyun main, I hope this still helped you out somehow. If you have any questions or anything to add, as always, leave a comment below. I would love to hear from fellow Chongyun lovers. So if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel for more guides and Genshin content. And I will see you all soon. Take care!